today?
Thank you. Good morning.
Okay, good morning. It's 8 o'clock. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you once again for joining us in our regular PAASE webinar session. So, today we have brought together four members of the PAASE who happen to be editors as well in different international journals. And they will share with us some of their experiences and some tips that can help academics and researchers maximize or optimize the possibility of getting their works published. So I will let them talk more about themselves as well as their respective journals. Um, so we have Professor Anthony Chu, we have Professor Diana Aga, Professor Raymond Tan, and Professor Chris Monterola, who I think might join us a bit later. So to start us off, we'll have Professor Anthony Chu. Anthony, would you like to say something first before I load your presentation?
I think everything is already in the PowerPoint.
Okay, so I'll begin sharing his
Good morning
presentation.
na lang. Good morning, maayong buntag, whoever.
So we have a mix of participants, some from the Philippines, some from the US, and some from other countries as well. Okay, so let me share Anthony's presentation.
The one uploaded this morning.
Okay, hold on. What happened
Ang
here?
file name 1002, no?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I found it. Share. Wait. Sorry about this. Okay, just making sure that the sounds can be heard. Okay, here we go.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to the PAASE webinar on editorial panel discussion. My name is Anthony Chu from De La Salle University, and I would like to start this panel discussion with more definitions because I think we have encountered most of my colleagues in the communities saying that I publish a paper. Somewhat, we noticed that there is a lack of understanding of the definition of what a paper is in the scientific community. Allow me to self-introduce myself in my journey of going through this editorial work. I am affiliated with mostly with these six journals as an editor-in-chief or a subject editor over the past 20 years in the area of industrial ecology, and also we launched a local Philippine Industrial Engineering Journal back in 2001. In 2020, the Journal of Cleaner Production has received more than nearly 30,000 journal entry papers, and there was a need to have some spin-off into specific categories, and I was asked to lead the brand new journal called the Cleaner and Responsible Consumption, which is very much conforming to the SDG 12 of the United Nations, and I gracefully accepted the responsibility prior to my retirement. My talk will focus more on the definitions in the journal landscape, and when we talk about a paper or a scientific publication, it must be a research publication. It has gone through a thorough science research methodology, and it is a publication with a standardized unit conforming to the norms of the discipline. It has been guaranteed with the quality assurance because it's reviewed by the peer. It contains scientific knowledge, contribution to the knowledge domain, and it is committed to a public record, which is traceable on a permanent basis. For such a there are several journal levels, but I will like to categorize them. We normally put it in one is called the index, and the other one is non-index. For the index, these are systems that have already pre-selected and kind of a quality check on those journals that are recognized by the peers and therefore they receive citation. Among these index journals, we also have some extremely well respected journals. These are the Nature, Science, and also the PNAS. We would like to focus mainly on the Web of Science and Scopus Index journals today, and a couple of other indexes that I will introduce also later. The Scopus and the Web of Science are currently the two more popular and recognized system. Web of Science is the more senior with higher seniority because it has been there for many years. It has evolved from ISI, Thomson Reuters, and they have produced product categories such as the Science Citation Index, Social Science Citation Index, SCI Expanded, etc. Scopus is gaining its recognition due to its part of recognition by one of the two main international university ranking counting papers under the Scopus Index system. Let us take a look on the journals that I am affiliated with, and so we can see the difference among the journals. You can see that all these journals are abstracted in the internet, abstracted in the website, or abstracted in its index system. But all of them, except the one from the Philippines, is recognized already by the Scopus system. And clearly, you can see the Journal of Cleaner Production is the most outstanding one because it is not just recognized by the Scopus, but it is recognized by the more stringent system called the Web of Science or the ISI, because it carries also an impact factor. Although Corpus has been coming up with a metrics on impact, however, it is not usually referred to the impact factor in the scientific community. When we talk about the impact factor, we are referring to the ISI collaborate impact factor. Another list of journals that I'm affiliated with also as an editorial board member, you can notice that not all of them are accepted into the Scopus. Some of them are just working with specific discipline indexes like EBSCO and ProQuest. These two indexes are recognized by specific discipline in the area of business and management. And the other one is recognized by the EI or Engineering Index or the Comp Index by the engineering community. However, the recognition of these indexes have moved upward more recently into a generic pool of these two indexes of Scopus and Web of Science. So almost all the journals are working very hard to trying to enter and to be recognized by these two indexes. Again, among these journals, you can see that RCR is the most influential or the most respected, and it has a high impact factor of 8.086. But before we touch on the H index, let me talk some more about impact factor. I think for the engineering science field, a journal with an impact factor of 1.5 plus minus are quite significant already. This is due to the fact that in some specific engineering areas, such as mine, production research or production engineering, do not have the mass of audience in the community big enough to generate such a big and high impact factor. If a journal in my area of engineering or kind of environmental science reach a 3.0 to a 5.0, this journal is already considered quite with a high impact. And if it has gone beyond 6.0 to 10.0, I would say that it already belongs to the top 5 or top 10 journals among 50 journals in the ISI or the Web of Science. In the field of sustainability, I think there are more than 100 journals recognized, but in the environmental engineering, um, there are around only 50 journals uh, recognized and placed under the index system for ranking. So, unlike nature and science, especially in the medical science, wherein the mass of audience is so huge, they normally receive a very high impact factor of 40 or beyond. Now, let us go to H-index. Now, this is a measurement of an individual researcher. Now, many people will think that the H-index uh, is easy to get and easy to decline. Now, it is not that easy. This is a measurement along two axes. One is on how many index paper that you have published, and we all know that to get one paper published in an index journal is quite difficult. So if you get 5 papers published, that's on the x-axis, you need also to be cited 5 times for each of the 5 papers so that you will be able to receive a H-index of 5, and so on and so forth. Now, my experience is that if you will be able to get a 2-digit H-index, that is H-index of 10, that is remarkable. In the Philippine community, among the engineering colleagues at De La Salle University, you can also already count probably not too many have a H-index of 10 or higher. Also, my observation is that it is very difficult to climb up H-index by 1 units, starting from 0 to 1, 1 to 2 until 10. Once you reach somewhere at 20, it is easier to climb from 20 to 21 to 22. And of course, when you reach H-index of 30, wherein one of my students just got a H-index, former student got a H-index of 30 this month, last September, I mean, is likely to reach much more higher H-index in near future because you are already an established researcher and people are running after your paper and they are looking, when they are searching for paper, they are looking or using your name in the advanced search. My last 2 slides uh, share with you some difference between the famous Google Scholar versus the Scopus Index. Of course, Scopus Index give you an H-index by counting the number of Scopus papers you have published. But the Google Scholar that we are more familiar with, especially that is the standard we use in NRCP in the Philippines, covers papers that are traceable in the internet. So even if your paper is published in a conference, but it is uploaded to the conference website, it will be counted. So it is much easier. For a mature researcher, uh, I would say the Google Scholar and the Scopus metrics will not be so far different. But for a junior researcher, regardless of age, but in terms of maturity in publication, a number of index journal publication, that makes a big difference. So if you do not have many publication in the recognized journal in the index system of Scopus or ISI, because when we talk about ISI, if your paper is in ISI, almost 100% it's already recognized by Scopus because ISI is more stringent, as I said earlier. Then you will see that the difference between the two are big because most of the paper are not part of the index system. So I take myself as an example. Mine is I have 150 papers found in the internet. So Google Scholar recognizes 150 with a H-index of 34. But strictly speaking, when I go outside into the international community, when people ask me what is your H-index, I cannot use my Google Scholar because H-index in the international community, they refer to the Scopus in the H-index, and I only get a H-index of 27 with around 110 Scopus paper to date. So this is a major difference when we talk about the two systems. However, to start really promoting the culture of research, Google Scholar is being used and promoted in our country, and I hope that we will be moving forward to use Scopus more often when we are more mature in the publication and research career. And finally, ESI. Now, in many countries when they have many people H-index of 50 to 100, and that is kind of difficult to imagine, they are no longer talking about H-index. So they ask you, how many ESI papers have you published? What is an ESI paper? ESI paper is the number of index journal papers you have published, and that has reached the top 1% of recognition or respected in terms of citations, etc. Now this is updated every 2 months, and it covers a rolling 10 years period. So in my case of 25 years publication, I think I have uh, 5 ESI paper at one point of time, and of course it's a rolling on a rolling scale. So I do hope that our research community in the Philippines will now be able to distinguish the difference of these terminologies. And when we talk about I publish a paper, we are referring to publishing a research scientific paper in one of the internationally recognized index systems. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for that overview, Anthony. So if you have any questions, we'll tackle them later on. So now I'd like to call Diana.
Hi, sorry, I'm just gonna share my screen.
Yes.
Um, this one. Okay. All right. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. So good morning to the people in the Philippines, and good evening to the ones who are somewhere else. So I'm Diana Aga. I have been an editor of the Journal of Hazardous Materials since 2011. And I'm glad that Anthony talked about impact factor. So the impact factor of Journal of Hazardous Material is 9.03 this year. So it's actually the second, the top 2 journal in environmental science and engineering. So I'm quite happy that we've managed to go up to 9. When I joined in 2011, the impact factor was only 4. So we've managed to get it really up. And just this year, my publisher asked me to launch a new journal. So we launched a sister journal called Journal of Hazardous Materials Letters, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. So you could see that in the impact factor of the Journal of Hazardous Materials Letters is not available yet because you calculate it based on 3 years, and we really just started. There are major differences. One major difference is that the letters is open access only, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between open access and a hybrid, like the parent journal Hazardous Materials is subscription and gold open access. It's a hybrid. So again, I'm going to discuss that, the difference between the two. Okay, my topic so I only have 13 slides because I prefer that people ask questions later on. My focus here is to tell you a little bit about how, main reasons why papers are rejected. So give you some points as an editor. So I know this is a busy slide. But my point here is the first thing you need to look at when you pick a journal is to make sure that your topic is within the scope of the journal, because it's actually number one reason why we reject papers without review. So you don't even get reviews, you don't get any benefit of, you know, being able to improve your paper because you may have submitted to the wrong journal. Because maybe you would say, oh, I'll submit to the hazardous materials because it's very high impact factor, but your topic may be out of scope. So, so in every journal, they would have in their first page all the types of papers that they accept. So in our journal, we have full-length research papers. We also have review articles and then perspectives, which is kind of, the perspective is typically invited and is given by really established researchers. So, and also a lot of the review articles, you also contact the editor to see if your review article is appropriate. And typically, we also prefer that people that write review articles are well established, because if you're just starting in your career and you want to review a topic and you're not well known in that topic, people will not cite that because there's so many review papers. It's easy to write a review article, so most journals prefer that you have to be established to write a review paper. So anyway, a lot of journals will list all the topics that they are publishing. So you can see those here, but also the journals will list the topics that are excluded. So for example, in my journal, we get a lot of submissions about manufacturing explosives, and that's why we put it there. We do not publish because hazardous materials seem kind of like, okay, maybe you only, publish things that are exploding, but in fact we actually publish things on antibiotics in the environment and endocrine disrupting chemicals and microplastics. So those are all considered hazardous, but we do not publish explosives or even greenhouse gas. So it's excluded because Elsevier has other journals that would accept those. So it's also important to see what are not accepted in the journal so that you don't get rejected, because what you will see, so I'm going to give you some screenshots of what we see as editors, because and it might be different from every journal. So as editor, when I see a submission, so these are the choices of the editors. What we do, we can accept it right away, which never ever happens because it has to be perfect. So I've never accepted any paper without review. Or we could accept it with minor revision, moderate revision, major revision, or we could reject it based on, and this 4 choices here is after review. Or I could reject it, like without even sending it to reviewer, because it is out of scope. So editors always look at the papers, read the abstract, maybe scan through the article, and reject it because it's out of scope. Or we could reject it also without review by looking at the topic, the abstract, because it lacks novelty. It's just not new, especially for high impact factor journal, they really emphasize novelty. Or technical screening. So maybe the journal says the limit is 3,000 words and you submitted like 10,000 words, or the journal would also tell you limit of 5 figures and you have 7 figures. So just technical screening alone can reject it. Now you may have a chance to resubmit it if you fix what, so you also have to see the guide for authors to kind of know how many, what's the limit, okay? Oops, sorry, I don't know why it moved. The other reason for rejection is text similarity, and I will talk a little bit about that later. And sometimes your paper is really good enough to be submitted to other maybe lower impact paper journals, but not just quite good for a high impact paper. So we don't reject it, but we offer transfer. And I will also talk a little bit about that, because that's something that's new to most journals and you should really take advantage of that. Okay, so the letters that I talked about, and this is also my promotion, promoting our journal, because it's new. It was just established in May, and it's only online, and it's open access. And I will tell you a little bit about the advantage and disadvantage of open access. And the advantage of the letters sister journal is that it's a very fast review because it's only 3,000 words compared to the other parent journal, which is 7,000 words. And really, we are very picky for this because we want to have, we will only publish research articles with exceptional importance and immediate impact. So that's why it goes through a very quick review process, 2 weeks of review. So we either reject it right away or we review it, and within 2 weeks, you get the result. And we also invite frontier reviews. The topics are very similar to the parent journal, except that this is like shorter papers. And the other difference is this is open access, so it has an article publishing charge. And so open access journals are quite expensive. So that's the disadvantage, especially for people in the Philippines. You may not have the funding. So this is actually, even in the low side, sometimes they could go to $6,000. So the thing about this promotional journal, because it's new, we are really welcoming. So for those of you who may have something that may fit this journal, we are actually waiving the article publishing charge until December 2020 because it's new. And sometimes you may be able to contact the editor and say, look, we are from a developing country. We would really like to publish. You could do that. It's a secret that we only know. We don't advertise it. But you can contact the editor, and the editor really likes your paper. They might say, oh, okay, maybe for this time, we will waive your publication fee. So it sometimes is possible. So that's the letters. Now, the Journal of Hazardous Materials, that's the parent journal, is called hybrid because it can publish in a non-open access by subscription. So if your school have a subscription, you will be able to access that, but it's not open access. However, you can make your paper open access if you pay $3,180. So that's very expensive, right? I mean, who can afford that? But if it's open access, it's called gold open access. You can distribute it to anybody. It's on the internet. Anybody can use it, even people without subscription. So you can have a wide readership, right? So that's why you can have a lot of, your H index will go up because it's free, right? A lot of people can access your paper. So that's another way of making your impact factor, your H index go up. But it's expensive. So here's a little bit of a screenshot from the difference between gold open access, all open access journal, and hybrid. So these are your options. You can have the open access journal where you pay and it's free to everybody. Or there are journals that are hybrid where you can submit and don't pay, so no fees, but it's only open to academics who have a license to the journal, okay? And the thing is, if you go for the open access, you as the author will pay the cost of publishing. Whereas if it's not open access, you don't pay, and then the people that wants to read your paper are the ones that pay. So that's the difference. Okay, so this is probably more interesting to you. What are the reasons for getting rejected? And this probably are only some, but this is what I thought about. Research topic is outside of the scope, the journal. I talked about that. It's really important that you look at the scope. The paper is poorly prepared. So even if your topic is, your research is really novel, if you organize it poorly, the grammars are bad and it's too long, and the figures are poorly made, it turns off the reviewers, and they don't. So think about this: reviewers are free. So we review paper, we don't get paid. So if I'm reviewing a paper and I look at your paper and just kind of glance at it, and I look at the abstract and the grammar are poor and the figures are bad, I won't even read it. I'm just gonna reject it. So that's kind of the attitude of reviewers. So you want to make sure, you know, you don't get rejected because of poor preparation. Of course, this is the hardest one. It's lack of novelty or no significant information. So this one is hard because you just have to have a novel paper. So I can't talk too much about it. But plagiarism is detected, and we will tell you about this because you can fix it. You don't have to be rejected because of plagiarism, and I'll tell you how we detect it. And then the conclusions are not well supported by experimental data. So that's again something you can fix. And this is something you can fix. Once in a while, you get rejected just because of reviewers. And believe it or not, it happens even to published people. You know, sometimes you just don't get lucky with reviewers. Okay, so I'll give you a couple of slides from what I see as an editor, and I black the author for so you don't see for protection. So here's what I see when I see an assignment as an editor. I see the title, of course, this is the author, and I have all this data that I can click. And I could see, for example, this paper says similarity check. So we have the software that check about plagiarism. So it says it has 36% similarity with published paper, internet, anything. And then the duplicate submission, 11%. So that's low. The other one, it has a lower similarity. So it's not so much in terms of plagiarism. In fact, so we don't really have a number of cutoff. It's 36 is on the high side. So we don't have like a solid, like if it's 25%, it's plagiarized. We don't have that. And I will show you why we don't do that. However, when it's duplicate submission and it's red, so then we click on that and say, this must have been submitted before. It could have been rejected before. It could have been submitted in other journals. So you want to be careful that you don't submit very similar paper twice in the same journal, because it's actually not allowed. You can't submit the same paper in two journals. So anyway, so if I click on the authenticity, this is what I see. So I see where the duplications are. This software tells me that 13% of this was copied in this publication, probably copied verbatim. And then 2% was from the internet, and it tells you what the site is. So you can't really just kind of copy a lot of the things, especially in the introduction. We see a lot of this introduction. Now, take note though that this similarity doesn't include references, because of course you could use the same references. It also doesn't include methodology, because you could be using the same method, and it's allowed, it's okay. The other thing, so going back to this, so if I did detect that text similarity, I will reject the paper right away without review. Text similarity, there you go. And then the last one that I want to talk about is this reject and then offer transfer. If I see your paper actually has quality, is good, and it has something to contribute, but maybe not quite good enough for our journal, I would offer it to be transferred, and you will get all the reviews. So you will already benefit from the reviews. You can revise it based on the review, improve your paper, and accept this offer. You don't have to accept it, but if you accept it, the editors will actually tell you, so let's say maybe your paper belongs to nanotechnology. So I could click that, and I can click on two or more actually. So it doesn't have to be, I can click all of this, but as an editor, I could say, your paper fits really well in maybe in case studies or in monitoring or something like that. So that is my presentation for now, and I hope you can ask me questions later. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Diana. And you really added a lot with regards to how the review process happens within the journal. So next, let's have Raymond.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Raymond Tan. I'm from De La Salle University, and let me just find my file So I can begin screen sharing.
Okay.
Okay, my talk is how to optimize a manuscript. And I'm assuming here that the work is solid enough to begin with, following the guidelines that Diana just mentioned. So the problem would be, how do you write it in a way that brings the point across properly? Now, I'm affiliated with maybe half a dozen journals, but these are the 4 which are in my core research area of green engineering. The one closest to my heart, so to speak, is Process Integration and Optimization for Sustainability, which is a Springer Nature journal. I'm one of 3 editors-in-chief, and this is a journal which we raised almost like a child from infancy. We launched in 2017, but we actually conceived of the journal much, much earlier than that. I think 2008 was when we first dreamed about having a journal like this. I'm also involved in sustainable production and consumption. It's an Elsevier iChem e-journal. And then there's another journal by Elsevier, which, as in the case of Anthony's and Diana's journals, it's an open access journal, which went live just a few days ago, in fact, with the first few articles. And also, as in the case of their open access journals, submissions within this calendar year will not require an article processing charge. And the journal which I've been involved with the longest is Clean Technologies and Environmental Policy, going back to 2007. This is a Springer Nature journal. And all of these journals are in my core research area of green engineering. These are predominantly, but not exclusively, engineering journals. That means that social science or economics aspects that relate to particular environmental control and environmental improvement measures are also considered and accepted as well. So what I intend to talk about really are the common weaknesses of journals, and in particular, because I imagine most of you in the audience are from the Philippines or from Asia. These are 5 common flaws which are probably cultural artifacts. Now, if you've received your training overseas, and especially in the West, these are probably weaknesses which you've shed through PhD training. But I think it's essential to point these out. And of course, if you know what's wrong, just avoid doing these, you can certainly optimize how you write your papers. So number 1 is very often Filipino researchers do not write for an international audience. And it's almost as if maybe there's the subconscious feeling that your work isn't good enough for export. But if you think about it, how can you publish in an international journal if you're trying to speak to a predominantly local audience? So that's number 1. Number 2 is the use of hesitant statements, using too many hedging words. For example, because you're not sure of yourself, you'd put probably or possibly or to the best of my knowledge. And these are all hedging phrases and words which signify lack of confidence. And really, reviewers can detect that and editors can detect that. So I think it's essential to shed the habit of weakening our statements. The next point is literature review. A good literature review is intended to do 2 things. It establishes the current state of the art, and it identifies the gap in the state of the art, which you then try to fill with your own contribution. And that means that you really need to be comprehensive and up to date in the analysis of what has gone on before, so that you can make a strong argument that your work is novel and is a significant contribution. And that's the next point that I will state, that this is not something to be left implicit in your introductory statement of your paper. It really needs to be stated outright that your work is novel and contributes something as justified by your survey of the prior literature. And the last point, I think, is a distinct Filipino cultural trait. Filipinos like to tell stories. Now, any article will have a narrative component that you really give an account of your experiments or your simulations, and what happened leading to the paper. But I think what is often missing is the expository aspect. In other words, you're arguing for a particular point. And this, again, is not something you should just leave as an implied idea in your paper, but should be stated in addition to the narrative. So the way I would tell my students to do it is you not only tell the story, but you tell the reader what is the lesson of the story. So now what I would suggest, what I've done really is pointed out one of my recent works. The reason I'm pointing this out is it's short enough. It's 2.5 pages, so you can read it in a few minutes as a style guide, and it's in an open access journal. So you can find this quite easily on Science Direct. So number one, short titles signify confidence. And there is a weak statistical correlation that generally papers with short titles tend to be more highly cited. So keep it brief, and notice we did not say here, we could have said a proposed linear program for optimizing enhanced weathering networks in the Philippines. So this is meant to work anywhere in the world, so we remove the geographic limitation. It's not something we proposed, it's something we developed, and we don't want to show hesitation in the way we write things. Next is authorship. We really need to be careful about this. Generally, authors need to agree among themselves as to inclusion and sequence. And especially if you're collaborating with relatively new people, I think it's essential that there's a gentleman's agreement, or ladies and gentlemen's agreement, on all of these issues. And speaking of collaboration, it's quite useful to work with people from other countries and institutions. The reason for that is partly because cultural differences allow team members to cover each other's blind spots. Now, the abstract is an important point to optimize because it's something which is visible to all readers, even if they don't have full subscription or full access to the main text of the journal. So it's important to provide enough information to, number one, invite the reader to look at the full manuscript. But in short terms, I think the abstract should be like a movie trailer in that it invites viewing, but it should be like a bad movie trailer with spoilers. You should know what the ending is. And the reason for that is, again, your work can be cited just on the basis of a complete abstract if you provide full details. Now, you can also optimize the searchability of your paper, or discoverability of your paper, by not repeating the same words that you use in the abstract and title, but using synonyms. So when somebody searches on Scopus or Google Scholar and they use not exactly the same words that are in your title, then you still increase the chance of popping up in the search results. Now, what about the introduction? This is where an integrated literature review would often be useful. And I try to visualize a funnel-shaped argument on a paragraph by paragraph. What you do is you gradually bring the topic into focus from broad issues until you get to a focal point, which is your own paper. And what you do next is, after you've done the survey of the existing literature, it's important to make an actual statement of what gap exists. And this is what we state in our paper. And notice there is no hesitation. We didn't say to the best of our knowledge. And when we make a statement, when I make a statement that is to the best of my knowledge, and I don't have to say that. So no record exists, and there's a footnote pointing out that we actually did a database search on a particular date. So it's a very precise and strong statement. Once you've done this, then you can make an equally strong and decisive statement that we address the research gap by developing this methodology, which nobody else has developed before. And again, no hesitation. The middle part of the paper, everybody knows how to write this. It's the narrative where you tell the story of how you got your results. So we'll skip that. The conclusion should be written in a particular way. You do three things. You restate what you've just done, but it's also important to take the perspective of the reader. It's important to point out why that's useful for him or for her. And finally, we just pay back to the research community. It's always a good idea to suggest what the next step in the research topic should be. And just rough heuristics. When you look at your reference list, because your idea is to have a state-of-the-art survey, while it's important to have the classical historical papers to be cited, the list should be predominantly recent papers. And my rule of thumb for myself is look at the past 5 years, and those papers should dominate my list. So there's the paper again, if you want to download it. And that concludes my brief talk. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Raymond. And Diana has a comment with regards to the literature review to make sure that you cite because typically the authors of these key papers might be invited to review the paper. Okay, so now let's move on to Chris Monterola.
Yes, thank you, Kay. Let me share my
Good morning,
presentation.
Chris.
Hello, good morning.
Okay.
Okay, so again, thank you, Kay, for the invitation for today. And I thoroughly enjoyed the presentation of Anthony, Diana, and Raymond. I think it's a presentation that if we, these are presentations that in my opinion, maybe we should distribute to almost all the universities, especially here in the Philippines, where there are PhD programs. Yes, my short presentation will cover one of the journal that I am currently serving as an academic editor. The chief editor of this is Hiroki Sayama. It's a journal that has been here for about 15 years now. The journal is on complexity science. It looks at the discipline of complex systems. Current impact factor is at 2.462. And there has been a relative increase in the impact factor of this journal since 2000. Sorry, this has been here for more than 20 years now. And yes, the most recent impact factor, as mentioned here, is about 2.462. So the four complex systems are characterized by interaction between their components that produce new information or emergent behavior, and that is the main focus of this journal. And concepts that are related to complexity includes the following: questions on adaptability, complex networks, criticality, evolution and emergent behavior, nonlinear dynamics, pattern formation, and self-organization. And anything that deals with methods, these are the different methods that can possibly understand those ideas, most of which are computer-based methods, most of which requires programming and coding, from agent-based modeling all the way to machine learning. My contribution for today's discussion will be on dealing with peer review. And probably the best way, and I think this is the general idea of dealing with peer review, is to use the so-called golden rule or the law of reciprocity, which is actually generally intuitive. Do not treat others in ways that you do not want to be treated yourself. And this was captured in an Elsevier article, most of which are quite intuitive. Main idea, as Diana pointed out, is that the time that you spend for reviewing is free, and therefore, but again, there are no perfect system in peer reviewing, but we are doing this because this is probably the most optimized way of pushing the boundaries of science. So the 10 ideas here, let me go very briefly, are essentially intuitive to most of us who've been reviewing articles for a long time. Okay, you accept an invitation to review when you should not. It is not your expertise. Don't do that. When you submit your review very late or not at all, many editors will when you submit an article to them, since they know that you are essentially doing that same thing, they sometimes has a certain bias towards doing the same thing to you. Ignoring messages from editor, this can be annoying. Okay, do not check for adherence to publication ethics, providing a useless review, providing unclear, unfair, and biased statements. All of this in general are intuitive. But I guess my main point here, in this general in peer review, is that at the end of the day, reviewing, peer reviewing, journal reviewing is an opinion, an expert opinion, and it helps if you can imagine. If it helps if you reflect on the process of publication as such. Having said that, mm, at least from my perspective, the tone of my reply to the referee every time that I get a review will be different, dependent on many factors. If I have not established myself on that specific field, or probably if I'm in an institution that is generally more inferior than other institutions. So, for example, if I'm in Max Planck, sorry, if I'm in affiliated with the Philippine universities compared to when I'm affiliated with Singapore or German universities, the way I praise my my reply to the comments of the referees will be different. I probably will be more agreeable, but then of course I have to explain my response to the referee if I'm in a Philippine-based institution, but I can be more aggressive if my affiliation is in Singapore probably or in Germany. So I will end my presentation on that short note, and of course I will be happy to engage everyone in this very meaningful conversation. Thank you, Kay.
Oh, thank you very much for that, Chris. And I'm sure our audience has a lot of have a lot of questions for our panel. So may I invite the panel to turn on their videos so that the audience can actually see them. Okay, for our audience, please don't be shy. Please type in any questions that you may have for our panelists. I think this is a very rare opportunity to actually get so many editors in uh, the same room in the same room. Okay, especially for those in the Philippines, it's quite rare to be able to actually talk with the editors. And right now, publishing has become an important thing. Responsibility for Filipino researchers. So it's not just a requirement for the academics, but also for the young researchers. It is a responsibility to actually share your your findings to the rest of the world. So any questions from our from the audience? None, none. Okay, so maybe I can just begin first. So I want to ask Diana. So you mentioned a while ago about the duplicate submission, and is there cases or are there instances wherein even if there is a high level of duplicate submission similarity, the papers are still considered for your journal? Or what do you typically do when you encounter this type of
Yeah. Which one? The one with the
similarity
authentic,
and submission, not the
the
authenticity,
plagiarism?
not the plagiarism. But you mentioned that the high similarity in submission, it was probably submitted previously in
Yeah.
other either in other journals. Yeah,
Duplication.
yeah,
Duplication. Yeah. Yeah. So sometimes, good question. So sometimes the duplication, we look at the history and it might say, oh, it's been rejected before. So this might also be a question that sometimes when I give editors talk, people ask, can you resubmit a rejected paper? Yeah.
yeah.
So this would be, it would show up there like, rejected paper. And then you could look at why it's been rejected and if they have addressed the issues. And typically a lot of journals would want you to, if your paper has been rejected, would want you to contact the editor that rejected it and say, can you consider my resubmission? I have modified all this.
Okay,
And yes, we do accept resubmission with permission.
okay. Thank you for that. What about for the others? Do you have similar experiences with regards to that, like getting a paper or receiving a paper that was previously rejected by another journal? And what was your take on it?
Well, again, I think my discussion this morning will focus on cultural traits. And I think in the Philippines, we might have young researchers who get their first taste of rejection, and that stings, but that's part of the scientific career, that you have to take rejections and learn from them. And as Diana said, if you can learn from comments that are harsh but nevertheless have valid points, you can improve the paper. And this happens even to experienced researchers. I had a paper which was rejected recently, I think 3 times. We went from a journal with impact factor 43 down to 31. Eventually, it's out in a journal of impact factor 12, which is still not bad. But the point is, with each iteration, you learn and see what's missing. But at the same time, you need the mental toughness to not see the criticism as a personal attack, just pointing out mistakes which you can fix.
Okay, thank you for that. And then we have a comment from yes. Is there somebody? Edsel, yes.
Yeah, well, I could add a little bit what Raymond had said to the younger people. Don't give up. Nobody gets accepted on the first submission. That's always the rule, as Diana had pointed out. She will never accept a paper on the first submission. It's just the nature of things. And if you get declined or rejected, that doesn't mean that's against you. It's actually for the improvement of your manuscript. So take it in a nice way. Of course, in the beginning, when you receive the rejection, you feel bad. But take a few days and then come back and read a report well and say, oh, maybe he's correct or she's correct, and then try to address those issues. And typically, the editors would give you a kind of a chance, a window of opportunity if they want you to resubmit. They will not say, submit and we will accept. They will never say that. But they will usually say, if you could address these issues, we will reconsider your manuscript. And that typically is opening the door for you to resubmit and take that opportunity. So but that's the process. You just need to be persistent. Don't give up. If you give up, then that's it. Okay.
Yeah, that's the end. Okay. Yeah. Edsel also made. Yes, Chris. Yes, please.
Yeah. Maybe just to add to what Edsel and Raymond said, I think that is the string that binds us all scientists. That the idea that we become humble because of this specific process, and that is why we probably respect people who are actually publishing. But let me go back to that idea that, again, at the end of the day, this is an opinion. It's an expert opinion. And one of the things that I learned in optimizing your publication, maybe just to add to some of Raymond's idea, is that one of my articles, which was published in Physical Review Letters, it's the top journal in physics, I think of the idea and wrote it in less than 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, and it was accepted quite instantly. But they have an article that I've been submitting to many journals for 2 years. Eventually, it was accepted in Optics Communication. I thought I liked that article, but then apparently it got rejected, and they don't appreciate the mathematics that was that was in that component. So, in terms of optimization, maybe sometimes when we hear the first review and we realize that the scientific community doesn't appreciate it, it is not optimal to waste too much energy when you realize that others thinks that it is not an interesting article in the first place. So again, let me go back to that idea. If you imagine this as an opinion, that this process is really trying to persuade someone with your opinion, sometimes you become more efficient in doing it.
Okay, thank you for that. And Edsel also mentioned a comment about the H index on how much it's dependent on each field. But let me add up a question from our YouTube, which is also related to H index. It's from Nolan Concha, and he's asking that would it matter if a large fraction of your H index or I-10 index comes from self-citation? So I think that's something that was not completely discussed earlier about. Yeah. Anyone wants to comment on that?
Just a quick comment. No, the greatest
Okay.
love of all, according to them, is learning to love yourself. So I think it all starts with that. But yes, self-citation is a natural thing. Self-citation is a natural thing. But at the end of the day, if you know that there is a problem if you're the only one citing
That's
your work.
correct. Yeah.
Yes, yes. I
I'll comment on that because I actually have a significant number of self-citations. Here is where you distinguish between self-citations that are intended to pad your curriculum vitae, which is in bad taste. But really, if you happen to start with your own earlier paper, branch of a research area, then you either cite yourself or you plagiarize yourself. So you can't help but cite your previous work if it is the seminal work in that area.
Can I add something?
Yes, yes, please.
Yeah, so if you're a professor and you all know that one of the bases for promotion is looking at the H index, the evaluators actually, you can calculate the H index without self-citation. So they remove those. So that's my one comment. The other comment I have is not quite about self-citation in that manner, but I want to warn other people who have been submitting papers, and if one of the reviewers tell you, you need to cite this.
Exactly.
I get a lot of those. As editor, I see that a person, the reviewer, tell the author to cite all his papers. And as editor, I already tell the author, say, you only need to cite papers that are relevant.
Exactly.
And and we actually flag those reviewers. So don't do it if you're reviewing and say cite my papers unless it's relevant. But so that's how there's a lot of people actually that has a very high H index because they review a lot and then they make people cite them.
Yeah, there's a related question also on YouTube before I go to the question here in the chat box. This one comes from Neil Lopez. So for the editors, do you also rate the reviewers based on the quality of their review or responsiveness?
Let me start. Yes, we do. And we rate from 1 to 100.
Okay.
100 being the best.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's possible also for the publisher to actually block the reviewer if they've been unethical.
Yeah.
Okay.
May I add to that as well? I think responsiveness is one of the criteria because this is really volunteer work. And it's a double-edged sword because editors remember reliable reviewers who deliver before the deadline.
Yeah.
Which is
the
great.
curse of success.
Exactly. Because then if you develop a reputation for giving quick reviews, reasonably sensible reviews, then you get flagged in a way and you get more invitations. And you sort of have to calibrate the delivery of the quality of service because otherwise you get swamped. And the other point I mentioned to Diana earlier before we started is in the West, for example, in the EU, and I think in the US this might be true as well. People really value their breaks, whether it's summer vacation or the Christmas holidays. And here in Asia, what I find is I get a spike in invitations around June and around December. So that's part of the dynamics of the global ecosystem.
Yeah, I think Anthony has something to say.
Yes.
Yeah.
The computer, the artificial intelligence system is very useful nowadays. Now the Elsevier has already introduced a new system called the EM, which Diana just showed you. The EM is one of the newest platform now in the Elsevier after EES and eVice. It has built-in artificial intelligence system. So there is a metric, there is everything they are telling you about everyone in the world. They know your everyday likes and dislikes.
Like Facebook. Okay, so let me go to the question from Rith. So quite a number of questions. So for Professor Tan, what are the differences between the subject editor, associate editor, editors-in-chief in terms of role and responsibility? Is Springer Nature different from Nature? To Professor Chu, why do you use the Scopus H index in the international community? Oh, and not the Web of Science or ISI index. Okay, so Raymond?
Let me address the first question. The hierarchy of editors really depends on the scale of a journal. And if you have a small enough journal, actually, you can just work with an editor-in-chief and an editorial board who can help the boss. Now, as a journal grows and as the scale increases, then you can have, number one, in engineering, we have something called redundancy, which is a good thing to have. So nowadays, it's okay to have a couple or maybe 3 editors-in-chief. As the journal diversifies, you may have groups or clusters of topics, and then you can begin assigning a second tier of associate or subject editors who then manage submissions in particular areas. So the editor would take the top person would take submissions, identify which subject area this fits in, and then would pass it on to the next level subject or associate editors. And then the editorial board members are typically, well, it ranges from just being an honorary position where you're part of almost like a club of people, but you're also, in a sense, a captive reviewer. If the editor has a problem finding somebody to review a paper, then you're sort of socially obliged to help out as a reviewer. Oh, and Springer Nature is simply a merger of what were previously separate companies, Springer and Nature Publications.
Oh, okay. All right. Anthony, would you like to comment on
Yes.
the H index?
On the H index, the more popular H index people are talking nowadays is the Google Scholar H index and the Scopus H index. And I was presenting the talk from a Philippine perspective. So measuring among the two, I was encouraging people to aim for the higher one because Scopus has been very aggressive. It's not a promotion of the Elsevier product. It has nothing to do with that. Although Elsevier has been very aggressive in pushing many of its products from Science Direct to Scopus and to many metrics. To some extent, Scopus is successful, being recognized by one of the 2 world international university ranking. That's why Scopus is gaining recognition. However, as I mentioned in my last slide, the ESI, in many developed country or OECD, well, excluding few, like sometimes Germany, they do not pay much attention to index paper or H index. But in many advanced or developed countries, the ISI impact factor journals are the only journals they count. Scopus journal are even not really treated. But I think from the Philippines viewpoint, I think we have to aim first at Scopus before we aim at a pure ISI journal achievement. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And
Yeah.
I have one question. Yes, do you want to add something?
Can I comment on H
Yes,
index? And this is a side note, but if you haven't actually read the paper of Jorge Hirsch in 2005, there's a lesser known index. H index is a function of time. It never goes backwards. And there's a section in his paper which proposes the M index. And the idea there is you take your H index and you divide it by the age of your first paper. And Hirsch proposed, at least for physics, that in the US, for physics in the US environment, moderately successful is when you have an M index of 1, meaning it goes up 1 point each year on average. You're pretty special if it's 2. It goes up 2 points every year. And shall we say, stratospheric once you get to 3. I mean, not quite Nobel, but maybe in the Nobel radar if it's 3. Now, this was in 2005, so I don't know how true it still is, but it's a good point to make that it is a function of time.
So let me just ask, in addition to what you mentioned. So you mentioned that this was based on physics. So can you comment on how that particular indicator can possibly be different if you were in another field? Would it be different, or is that a good guideline to go by?
Okay, that's an interesting point, because the citation traditions are very different in different fields. And for example, uh, in mathematics, the tradition is very sparse citations, which means mathematicians would typically have low career citations or low H indices relative to their degree of actual influence in their discipline. And at the opposite extreme, you'd have astronomers. If you take a typical astronomy paper, half of the paper would be references. So they would have seemingly astronomical H indices and citations, but it's because of the traditions in their discipline. So the basic rule of thumb I use is, when I compare people, it should be apples to apples comparison. So compare the engineers with other engineers and not with astronomers or mathematicians.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think Edsel wanted to add. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to add there because there's actually a reason also why there are differences in the mathematical sciences. We don't write as many papers, say, as maybe in other fields. Yeah, because it's just a different kind of field. So that's why the citation number is not as high. And there are actually papers on this. I was reading some papers on this, comparing the H indices for different areas. And for those who are evaluating tenure promotion in the universities, and I have done this too in my university, you need to be very careful in terms of using the H index. You cannot compare across different fields, because that's a very dangerous thing to do. Yeah, so just to be careful.
May I add?
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
Yes.
as I mentioned earlier, H index as well as the impact factor has something to do with with the discipline,
field.
and therefore the population of the research community, the number of paper published, the number of interested audience, no, they all are important, dominant factors in the H index and also in the impact factor. Now, there are a lot of new metrics invented or introduced, but some are not getting very, very popular, but some of them are very logical and have improved at the current one. However, due to some, in Philippines, Sanayan, no, we are so used, no, to certain older system like impact factor, so we stick to the impact factor. Schemaco, SCI Mago, and ISI both have a journal impact factor ranking. And the one used by Schemaco has actually make more sense, because not every single citation is counted as one, but it is checking even where is that citation or where is the paper cited. If that is cited in a high impact factor journal, it has a weight of higher than one and lower than one if it is not. So they make some weighted adjustment. However, that we are still very much stick to the old system sometimes. So so both, no, the ISI and also the Web of Science and also the Scopus have a similar system, but sometimes we have some preference. And one special thing is, especially I like Scopus because it's free. Everybody can go there and check. And I think at least the first page is free. And when even you check on the author, you can see at least the first 10 papers, most 10 recent papers, while the other product may not be totally free. So that's why Google Scholar is much more popular, because it's totally free. So these are some of these factors affecting the popularity and acceptability in the community.
Okay, thank you for that. So let me ask a question from the YouTube channel. And I think this is something very important, because the current landscape of, the trend now of conferences popping everywhere. And so the question is, what are the chances of a paper being presented in a conference and being resubmitted into a journal? So what are the chances of it being accepted, and what are some guidelines that should be done between the paper that was submitted in the conference and that which will be submitted in the journal?
Okay, let me take a crack at that. Back in the old days, maybe a generation ago, conferences were essentially closed door events in a sense, that the papers there were accessible to the participants. So it's almost like having a private event where information is shared among 100 or so people or 200 or so people. And thus, these were not considered publications per se, but these are almost like having a preview of your scientific work to be vetted by a small group in a conference, and then you get it published for the world, for the wide world to see. Since the turn of the century, we've had a shift where conference proceedings, which were originally, these were just paper things that you got as part of your conference kit, but nowadays these are web visible and thus in effect published. And what that brings into the picture is the potential distortion of the scientific record. So to keep my answer short, essentially the rule of thumb now is there needs to be a significant differentiation between the conference version, which is typically shorter and very sparse in the description, compared to the full journal version. And many conferences actually attract a good following because of the practice of having an internal vetting process for the conference version and the requirement or the possibility of getting invited for journal special issues that follow the conference theme. But there's a requirement that there is significant differentiation in quotation marks between the extended article version and what should be a shorter, more concise conference version. So as to what constitutes significant differentiation, at the minimum, it should pass through the automated, the machine check that the publisher uses, because the conference proceedings would already be web visible and part of the scientific literature. But that's superficial in the sense that essentially what it checks is the use of similar words and phrases. So there needs to be substantive differentiation. And what I do for myself in my own work is present, for example, a computer model which does a particular function. There's one example to show that it works on this particular scenario. When I get an invitation, I make sure there are at least a couple of additional, more extensive and more detailed demonstrations of the same computer model, or even modify the original model based on the feedback I received during the conference.
Thank you. I think Anthony wanted to add to that.
Yes. Aside from the traditional way of dealing with what Raymond said, a good approach is that you may request the conference organizer not to include your paper in their proceedings. Now, if that is excluded from the proceedings, but only presented as a PowerPoint in the parallel session, you will not be treated as a self-plagiarism because it never go into onto the online system.
Any comments from? Okay,
Yeah.
Chris, yes. And
Yeah,
then,
maybe just to add, everything that Anthony and Raymond said about substantive differentiation between journal and conference proceeding, they are true for almost all disciplines except computer science. So in computer science, more than half of the reference articles are actually in the conference proceedings, because it is very critical that you publish it on time. And some of the conference proceedings, the acceptance rate is actually a single digit, and especially those that are covered by IEEE journals, etc.
okay, Diana, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something very important. If you're presenting new results in a conference, especially in an international conference, be careful that you publish it right away, because there's a lot of stealing of ideas that happens. So if you have something like really exciting and you want to publish it, maybe you should think about not presenting it at the conference if you're not ready to publish it, because a bigger group, and it has happened to us many times, we have really exciting results, but then there's a bigger group that has more capacity, more students, more funding, and they get it done in a month, and then they publish it. And by the time we're done, it's now not novel anymore.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. May I suggest
Yeah.
you invite Raymond to say something about when you get some idea, you publish it first because it's his idea. If I will say it, I will plagiarize him.
Yeah, I should add to Diana's comment. One way that you could eliminate the stealing of ideas, you could put your manuscript in the archive. I think in the mathematical sciences we have the math archive. I think in biological sciences there's the bio archive. Because when you put it there, you are basically saying to the world that you have this idea. You're the first one to have this idea. And if somebody doesn't refer to it later, you could say, I have this archive paper that I put there on July something. So there's a date that is that it's like postmark, and that's one way that we try to eliminate this danger of getting what do you call that, stolen from.
Stolen
Yes,
ideas, yeah.
Getting scooped. Yeah.
Getting scooped.
Yeah.
That's the correct one.
Yes.
Getting scooped. Yeah.
Thank you, Edsa, for bringing that up. So recently, we've had a lot of preprints being published. It was initially popular in certain fields initially, but I think now it's getting popularity from other fields as well. So I wanted to ask the editors, what are the policies of your publishers with regards to preprints? Like if it's already in the archive, and then the author submits it into a journal, into your journal, can they be accepted, or does the author need to do some revision when you compare it with the archives?
No, you.
I think Diana mentioned it in the usual Elsevier setting. You can in fact see all these preprints that are made available, and sometimes even where they have been submitted previously. The process being an opinion process, I would say there has been biases. If it was published on a journal that has a lower impact factor than your journal, of course, you will be or if it has been submitted and rejected in a journal that has a lower impact factor than your journal, you will have certain biases through it. That is why I think this is a common practice. What Raymond said, that you first submit it into top highest impact factor journals like Nature, etc., and then go down. The bias is lower. Yes.
Can I comment on that?
Yes,
it's
please,
a good
Diana.
practice. Yeah. So I agree completely that you normally aim high. The only caveat to that is if you keep going down, 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 and somebody already scooped your idea, then that's because it also happened to us. Like we submitted it in like really high impact factor and then got rejected, and then the second one got rejected, and we keep improving it. By the time it was really good, somebody submitted it in a higher journal. So there's always a balance of not waiting too long.
That is why, Kay, I like this this meeting that you organize, because one of the most critical factor really is the editor, the academic editor. Even academic editors, you can choose, you can decide, you can ask during the submission, whom do you imagine that you would like, the editors that you'd like to handle your manuscript. Sometimes it is even included in when you submit a referee. You can actually determine who are you recommending to become the academic editors. And even the editor, they have evaluation of a metric to determine who are the most efficient editors, the rejection rate, etc., etc. And having learned that from one of the editor, in fact, I probably I will be an editor in the academic board again of 2 journals, but I decided right now that not to be part of that, because I know that I cannot do it during this time that I'm exceptionally busy. So I would like to promote those 2 journals, Journal of Computing, Computer Science, and the Future Generation Computing Systems. The editor-in-chief mentioned to me that, especially if you are, I'm not too young, no, but in general, there's also that criteria that where you actually look at and all the academic editors, and if you're tagged, this is being distributed to all the chief editors of the different journals. So it's very important that you become aware of such.
Okay, I want to comment on the original question about
Sorry.
preprints.
Okay.
Preprints these are not journals, and papers that appear in preprints
yeah.
are not considered publications. They're not considered
Yeah.
finished products. So journals generally allow, they would allow resubmission. It's not actually resubmission, but the submission of a paper that was originally in a preprint server, provided it's reasonably current. One of the journals I'm involved with rejected a paper that originally was in a preprint server because it was too old and considered no longer current. And something which has happened more recently, you remember we did that computer model for antiviral allocation back in April for COVID-19. And we submitted that to Clean Technologies and Environmental Policy. And it was actually the publisher that prompted us to get the result out even before peer review by partnering. They have a preprint server partner, and they actually urged us to release the results early via the preprint server. So it can work both ways. But the central message I want to drive home is papers in preprint servers are not finished products.
They're
and
not
if you're a
published.
student
Yeah.
looking at that as the outlet, don't stop there, because that doesn't count for anything except to establish priority.
That's correct. Yeah, they're not publications. The archive, those are not publications. But you could submit, and what happens usually is you could put your manuscript in the archive, whatever area you are in, and then when it gets accepted for publication by the journal, the archive will then put that published paper itself in the archive. So it will replace whatever you put there. Now, in the mathematical sciences, this is quite critical because reviewing in the math sciences takes a long time as compared to, say, biology or maybe chemistry. We submit papers and it will take 6 months before you might get the review, because it's just harder to review papers in the math sciences. So if you don't put it in the archive, then there's the great possibility that somebody will scoop you. So a little bit of a thing there, yeah. So what differences in the thing. We try to speed up the reviewing of papers, but it doesn't happen in the mathematical sciences. It just takes time. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Edsel. So I have another question. So recently, CHED launched this new CMO for postgraduate studies. And part of that is to require now the PhD students to publish articles. So I just wanted to ask the editors, can you comment on, but right now, not all institutions in the Philippines obviously can meet this. Can you comment on what would be a strategic way for both faculty and PhD students to actually meet this particular target?
I can start with
Yes.
my experience on this one. One, we have to understand that PhD is a research degree, and being a research degree, most critical of which is to publish an original and novel work, not just original but novel work. And from my experience, I'm actually the first PhD when I was in UP where this publication rule was imposed, that you should have a published article before you can defend your dissertation, which is a very important rule, especially in the Philippine context, because we don't have a lot of experts here to review your work, and it becomes politicized oftentimes between the conflict of the different mentors. When this was imposed, from my experience, and the first guinea pig, my advisor was Professor Cesar Saloma, and he's the one pushing for shots. So that is why I was the one. Given it becomes easier for people to graduate because there are less politics and there is a very defined goal in mind. And in this aspect, I would like to mention to all the people here that I'm inviting you to the launch of a PhD in data science in AIM. And this is very important, I think, having discussions like this one, because I look at the data. I think this was presented in PAASE I think several weeks ago by Professor Gani Tapang, taken from Professor Saloma's talk. The College of Engineering in UP Diliman, one of the largest colleges, can only produce 4.3 PhDs every year. And the College of Science can only produce 13 PhDs annually. It has the largest number of centers of excellence and National Institute of, and it is very critical that we operationalize this, understand really what is the PhD degree all about. Yeah, the reason why I think especially UP system at this point has a lot of inefficiency is because before for a long time this was not required, and therefore the PhD degree has been highly politicized to the extent that there are more PhD granting degrees than the number of PhD that graduates every year. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you for that. Anyone else wants to comment?
I can comment.
Okay, yes, please, Diana.
This might not be too easy for students in the Philippines because of the resources. But typically, if you do, you could collaborate with, researchers abroad. I've hosted several students from UP and Ateneo to use our instruments and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, in chemistry, at least in my group, it is required to have first author paper before you can graduate. And then several of them have collaborations. So those are added value. But again, I recognize it's not that easy to generate novel data and, statistically significant data when you have low resources. So I would encourage you to reach out to, other people in abroad. I mean, Singapore has a lot of Filipinos there now, in Hong Kong. If you need the instrument to gather some data, but it's very, very much a good idea to publish, of course, as a PhD student. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Raymond.
I have a quick comment on this. I think in general, it's a good idea because raising the bar and imposing additional quality restrictions will help improve the educational process. The main issue that needs to be managed is the timeline. And it's more problematic. PhD is okay because you have 3, 4, 5 years to do it, or longer depending on how bad you are. But if you're a master's student, it's a bit more difficult because you have, say, a year to do your thesis. And the timeline I've had papers in my career that took 3 years from initial submission to final web visibility. 2 years and 10 months is my record. So it can happen that completion of the degree might be delayed by a paper purely out of bad luck. So, but then again, this is where proper supervision comes into the picture, because a good advisor should not just know the science, but should be a coach in the sense of knowing risk management. What's a journal which is good enough for your prestige as a grad student, but which is safe enough that it's likely to get accepted because you have, say, you're in good terms with the editors and the community that subscribes to that journal. So that sort of thing is a delicate balancing act that might be difficult for other institutions to manage.
Yeah.
If I may be aggressive on
Yes, yes.
this issue, Kay, actually, on that note, this is not to sound patronizing, but yes, indeed, mentoring is the most critical component on this one, understanding the risk. And in that note, I would really like to commend the De La Salle University. 2 decades ago, it is very difficult to, well, at least from my end, from my perspective as an undergrad in physics in the National Institute of Physics, I rarely see people actually publishing regularly every year. But right now, and that is why I think this is a very commendable venue. I see here Kay, Anthony, and Raymond, all Philippine-based. And I think in all the institutions in the country, and I will say this explicitly, La Salle is way ahead of anyone when it comes to properly developing mentoring technique. At least seeing these guys being the editor-in-chief of several journals, I'm very impressed. I'm exceptionally impressed in what you guys are doing. And I think creating such a community, if we can if this can spread to many other institutions, there are a lot of wonderful things that we can do for science.
Thank you for that, Chris. Yes, that is our hope as well, to extend this to others.
Well,
Yes, Raymond, you wanted to comment.
just a rejoinder related to what Chris said. I remember reading a CHED announcement more than a decade ago about a local exchange program, something like a local Fulbright exchange program where people can move from one Philippine institution to another, paid for by CHED. I don't know whatever happened to that, but that would be a good way to stir things up and build up capacity.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I just read some comments on the chat box. Yeah, I forgot to mention. The CHED is actually also requiring the master's program to publish, but not at the same level of journals as for the PhD. So it just requires the master's to publish in refereed journals. So there. Okay, so I think we've exhausted all of the questions. So maybe just a final round from our panelists, final words for our audience and budding researchers and maybe, current academics and researchers.
Oh, I should add a question to the panelists too.
Okay.
So,
One more question.
This is also kind of a warning, I think, for the younger people. Should younger people start badgering editors for the review of their papers after 3 weeks, 1 month? What do you all think?
Oh, wait. No, the answer is no. any comments?
The editors will start hating you.
Yeah, exactly. Don't do that, guys. Yeah, it's too dangerous to do that. Sometimes maybe if it's really long, you might say, I was wondering what happened to the review of my paper, but be very diplomatic because it could have implications.
Again, I go back to my idea, the most important idea, that it's an opinion. If someone is annoying, then you probably will be biased towards that idea. But if someone is a celebrity that you really like, okay, that is okay.
All right, my take on this is it's a matter of social capital. Regulars of a particular journal, whether regular contributors and readers of a journal, are almost like a society. They would eventually know of each other at the minimum, or would actually know each other. And this is where Chris mentioned the golden rule earlier. One of the reasons I make it a point to do prompt reviews, unless I lose track of the emails, is it builds social capital and allows me, when I need to contact the editor and say, do you know my average review time? What's taking you so long with my paper? I'm able to do that because people know that I do prompt reviews. So, but it's not something you abuse. It's something I would use it, for example, if I have a student who's pushing a scholarship deadline and needs that, and I would push some buttons and take advantage of the social capital.
I have to say though, as a reviewer, 5 days before it's due, I already get emails every day. I guess it's automatically sent by the editors that please do this. One time I got really annoyed. I'm like, I'm not even late. Stop emailing me. And Edsel always says, it's a computer doing that.
It's the computer automatic reminder.
To do. Yeah. So, when you're worried about your paper not getting reviewed, the editors are also annoying us who are actually reviewing the papers.
Well, you could actually tell, because the AE or the editor would say, just ignore the computer generated reminders to you. Of course, you feel guilty. Yeah, so you start not sleeping well because you have to complete the reviewing of a paper. But it's not as a reviewer. Maybe I should also mention this. If you accept to review, then I think even if you are short on time, don't submit a bad review just so you accomplish that time fulfillment, because I think it's the worst error to make. Take 2 more days, 3 more days to really understand the paper and then to give a good review, because it's also the author, because it could hurt people too. Yeah, and that's one thing that I try to do. Yeah, we all get very busy, but we also have that responsibility, I think, to the authors. And as Chris has pointed out, it's the golden rule in some sense. Yeah, so it's tricky. It's tricky because
Yes, Anthony.
Okay, Anthony first. I have
yeah.
one brief story later on.
Yes. While Edsel is talking about ethics of reviewers, probably I should also look at not only talk about the pros, but sometimes on the cons in publication. And it's about the ethics also of all the entire research community, especially for the applied sciences people, the engineers. We are very good into formula, and when we look at a formula going to become success in our career, we make sure we optimize every numerator, no? So that we know that we will achieve. And well, impact factor, H index, these are good, these are metrics. It can be used in a good way, and it can be used in a bad way. Some people try to optimize and maximize his H index, no? By just having a volume of publication. I think publication is a natural product of our passion, of curiosity for research, and for the social impact we want to improve the life of the human in this planet. So this is our contribution to the society, and let it flow naturally. Don't push too much, but optimize every single factor in the equation of the formula, and then bragging about, hey, I have a H index of 195. No, sometimes we already saw the bad effect of this metric in China over 20 years, because of the promotion system in China is heavily based or relying on these metrics. The people are doing everything just to get published. And of course, the word publish or perish, it also have the pros and cons. In my opinion, I think at the different developmental stage of a researcher, young, mature, and more senior, you have different role to play in the social impact and your contribution to the society. For the more very senior faculty researcher, I think volume should not be in your formula. You should publish very high socially impactful journal that is helpful to the society. And for the junior one, maybe you need to build something. And I think most of those who are PhD advisors have the best opportunity to publish a lot and all at the same time meaningful. It's not because he is having multi hands, etc. But he has a good pool of PhD students, and we always say that if you have you work as a team or you walk as a team, you walk far. No, so I think that is also a very important thing. Networking, teamwork, and I think that is what we aim also to do and work together all together in the Philippines for the development of our country.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. Raymond, you had something?
Unmute.
You forgot.
I'm going to correct myself because, not correct, but I'll add something to the point about pushing buttons. It can backfire. And I have a story from earlier this year where a small group was invited by the editor-in-chief of a pretty solid journal. And then we completed the paper, and it was about COVID and plastic waste. So we submitted the paper. Within about 10 days of the initial invitation, we came up with something. And then there was some delay in the editor-in-chief's reply. So my co-author, who knows her quite well, sent, I think, an SMS or some social private message, basically saying, you invite us, and yet you take so long to get the review process started. So she actually said, hold on to your shorts, something like the actual messages, hold on to your shorts, boys. Reviews will come soon. And the reviews came back with, we had 11 reviewers when they came out. So it can backfire.
Okay, okay. Thank you, everyone. Any final words before we close?
I have one more.
Okay, yes.
So, I borrowed this actually from a very eminent statistician who used to be in Berkeley, but he is now in London School of Economics, because usually we give kind of advice to young researchers, those who have just graduated or starting their career. And one of the advice that he always tells the younger people is, at the outset, you are branding yourself. If you're a new person, whatever you're doing in the very beginning, you are creating a brand for yourself. If you destroy that brand, it's very hard to get it back. So whatever you do, try to make it as best as you can, because one bad thing that you could do, it could easily destroy it, and it's very difficult to get it back. So I always remember his advice to these young people, and I think it's a very, very important advice. So when you're trying to publish papers, always say, is this good enough? Maybe I could improve it before you actually try to do things. And because if it gets there and something is wrong with it, maybe it could have bad consequences for you too. So those types of things, or even in teaching or whatever you do, you're branding yourself. So create a good brand. So that's the advice that he has. His name is Nicholas Jewell. So if ever some of you might hear his name, he sometimes writes in the New York Times. So Nick Jewell, but that's a really good advice for the younger ones.
Thank you, Ed Sales. I'll just go through one round. Chris, go.
Yeah, maybe my final word is, this is for the young people in the audience. Indeed, if you will go and pursue an academic career, especially a PhD, respect the process, the peer review process. There are many lessons that you will learn from here. I think sometimes the ideas that you thought are very strong, very correct, and very new are actually not new at all. So we will have a lesson of humility. And at the same time, this is the thing that binds all the scientists. You will have certain level of pride because you've gone into this one. But I like very much what Anthony said. No? At the end of the day, imagine what is the purpose of you doing this. I think my most important works are unpublished works, mainly because we cannot publish this because of the company, the other people that we're working with. There are some ethical consideration, there are some monetary consideration, and there are some data privacy consideration. But one good thing, though, when you started to some extent becomes very comfortable and secure with what you're doing, becomes easier for you to actually change the community, change the world, and have a social impact. And I think, yes, again, my main point is, undergo this peer review process. It's a beautiful thing it's a beautiful journey.
Thank you, Chris. Diana?
Yeah, I just want one quick thing. If you're new in publishing, I recommend you attend like writing workshops, but also do not forget to make sure that you have a colleague review your paper before you submit it. And maybe you can reach out to PAASE members. Like if you're in the area where my journal is covering, I would be happy to look at your, you can send me a PDF file and I can give you a comment if it's novel enough or what is missing. I'd be happy to give you some feedback.
Thank you for that, Diana. And Anthony, anything more? No more. Okay, Raymond.
Okay, just maybe my parting shot for this morning. You know, in the Philippines, it's fashionable to pursue impact from our research, which is fine because ultimately that's what we're all trying to do, improve the state of humanity. Nevertheless, there's a temptation to speed things up because we're so desperate for solutions. And I would caution young researchers especially against this.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Impact should not be pursued without the proper rigor, in the same way that, for example, you don't get to operate on people with illness until you get trained as a surgeon. So go through the actual process of getting the science right because otherwise the impact could be either bad or good. And to bring that into focus, think of this. We've all been reading stuff on how to protect ourselves from COVID-19 through this or that measure. Would you trust your life or the lives of your loved ones if you don't see a peer-reviewed paper at the end of the advice that you're taking?
Yep.
So that's my parting word for this day.
The
Thank
master's
you
way.
for- Yeah,
The
thank you for
master's way.
that. Okay, let me just share my screen before we close this session. I think that was a very engaging discussion, and I know that the time is not enough to cover all of the issues of publishing and doing research. So thank you. So next week, I'd like to invite you to our next webinar. It will be given by Professor Benchi Ablandagman. Her topic is on using DNA and RNA markers, image analysis, GIS mapping, LCMS, and mobile computing to address practical problems in Philippine agriculture. If you're interested to join us, please register at bit.ly/CA Lagman. And again, I'd like to inform everyone that PAASE has their own website, which is at paase.org. I believe that the list of our members are also there, together with their different specializations. So we've mentioned here already that a good way to strategize would be to find partners, maybe internationally. And Diana mentioned that she's also willing to have a look at some of your work if it's related to her field. So please have a look at that, and maybe you'll find future collaborators or mentors in PAASE. All of our webinars are, well, mostly our webinars are on our YouTube channel, PAASE Webinars, bit.ly, PAASE Webinars. So that is all from me. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending this session. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to email me, and I can forward them to the editors if it's for the editors. Thank you, guys. Have a good day
Thank
ahead.
you.
Good night for those in the US. Thank you. Thank you again for joining the panel.